Hello there, I'm Shane Young, and I get the privilege of helping you learn Copilot Studio. But before we start, I did want to let you know that I worked with the Microsoft product team to create this awesome training for all of you Power Platform rock stars. Cool? Cool. Okay, let's get to it. Who hasn't built a Power Automate Cloud Flow at this point? All right, I've literally built more than 1,000 at this point. Well, and I'll let you in a little secret. I think I'm going to build 1,000 more as part of my work building custom agents. In Copilot Studio, we have agent flows. These are cloud flows that run in the context of Copilot Studio to help you do all kinds of things. Agent flows are used as custom actions, triggers for autonomous flows, and even as standalone deterministic agents, which is just a fancy way of saying agents that follow rigid steps. And even if you aren't using any of that stuff, well, you're missing out, but when you use any of the 1,500 plus built-in actions with your agents, those are the same inputs and outputs you are used to seeing in Flow, just with a slightly different wrapper. Every moment you have ever spent working with cloud flows is going to pay off as you build custom agents. All right, that's enough of this pep talk. Let's switch over to my desktop and show you hands-on all of the places you put your flow skills into use. Well, maybe not all of them. We'd be here all day, but at least the core use cases. Okay, so we're back over here in my quick demos agent. Remember we talked about this in the last video about PowerFX, but I like to make these real simple agents where I'm just trying to learn how to do something. That way it doesn't have all those extra moving parts and I'm not worried about messing up something that already works. Like this one is just meant really for me right now to test very simple, quick things. Now the first thing we want to cover here is probably the most common way you're going to use your flow skills, but is also maybe the one that's least obvious that you're using your flow skills. And so that's actions. So if we go over here to actions, and remember, these are the way that you get your agent to do things, right? Like create items, read items, update things, get some filtered data back, all the actions that you're used to. And so here, what you want to do, if you say add an action, over in the search box, when we search here, this is going to search through all of your Power Platform actions. So the same exact stuff that when you go into Flow or Power Apps and search, you're going to see that same data here, right? For example, if we do Microsoft Teams, here's all those actions. And if we were to switch over to Flow real quick, and here I just have a simply manual triggered flow. And if we hit the plus here and we say add an action and we search for Microsoft Teams, right? We do a see more and there's all of the things. And so let's take an obscure one, respond in Teams task module. I don't even know what that is. So we'll switch back over to Copilot Studio. Oh, it's right there at the top because they're the same. They are literally the same list of actions. There's a little bit different interface for searching. You're going to see different things because the search system's different. But at the end of the day, everything that's over there is over here. So let's pick one that we're a little bit more familiar with and look at how we use that. So for example, how about post a message in a chat or channel? So we'll click on that. After a few seconds, it checks my connection information, right? That's normal. So we'll say next. And now we're just going to accept all the defaults here. We've talked about these before. So we're just going to say, well, we'll say add an action. Okay. And so now it's added. It brings us back over here. And so if we click into it, this first screen is a little bit different. And we've talked about how to configure it. So we're not going to worry about it. But the inputs, this is literally the same things that you see over in Flow, right? So it's like, hey, who do you want to post as? And it defaulted to dynamically fill, but we're going to change that to set as value. Confirm. And now if we click in here, we got user Flowbot Power Virtual Agents. Let's switch over to Flow real quick. Choose our post message in a chat or channel. And look, the little drop down here, Flowbot Power Virtual Agents user. Same exact stuff. Where they're like, hey, I want to post in my chat with Flowbots. Now when we do that, we're going to see additional options. Switch back over to our agent. We'll choose our Flowbot here. We're going to change our post in, hit the drop down, change set as value, say confirm. And then here in the drop down, oh, look at that. Same things. Chat with Flowbot. So the same exact things are happening. Now we get down here to recipient and we're like, all right, well, I want to send it to Shane and Chewy. So if we hit the drop down and we say, I want to set that as a value, confirm. Now here we go. We click in here. We don't get any type of picker. So how do we know what goes in here? Like, is it supposed to be their names, their email addresses? How do we separate them? So these are the places where I've been talking to people about building their first agents. They get stuck. They're like, what do I do now? I know I want to send it to Shane and Chewy, but I don't know how. Okay. So here's my best advice to you. Switch back to Flow, right? You know how to do it from here. You've been doing it here for years. So click in here and search for Shane. There's Shane. And then search for Chewy. There's Chewy. Now that still doesn't make sense because it's clearly formatted. But so one of the things I hope you've seen before in Cloud Flows, but if not, it's okay. It's up here at the top, we've got Code View. So you can do Code View. It kind of shows you like, hey, I give you an interface, but this is what I'm really going to send for that action. And so you can see like body recipient, Shane, semicolon, Chewy, right? And it's the email addresses. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy exactly that. Control C, not the double quotes, right? The double quotes is part of the JSON formatting, so we don't get those. We'll switch back over. And so here we're going to just paste that in just like that. And we know it's right because we've went over to Flow where we know that it works and we've stolen from there. So this is one of my biggest tips when it comes to learning like what goes in these boxes. Go over to Flow and figure out what goes in the box in Flow, look at the code, and then you'll be able to see exactly what it wants. Did you also know that when you're over here in Actions, you can look at the code? So if we go up here to the More and we say Open Code Editor, and if we look in here, it is formatted different. It is not JSON, it's their own format, but we don't care about that. What I find interesting, look, body.recipient, and then Shane, semicolon, Chewy. So I can see that, yeah, these two things kind of line up and match. So as I get into more advanced scenarios, and I'm trying to really like break down what's happening under the hood, what it wants, I'm using these two different code views to kind of get there, right? But this isn't new skills. This is the same stuff we've been doing forever. We're just, doing it a slightly different interface. And now we're able to build and understand a lot better what's going on. Okay, let's switch back. Now, also though, remember as we go here to our inputs that we have a lot of more flexibility when it comes to our agents. Because I don't have to hard code this to Shane and Chewy. I could have, instead of doing that, right, we would have left this as dynamically fill, confirm. And so then now we're saying, all right, enter a name or email address. Well, we know really it's an email address. And so I would go down here to the description and I would write instructions to help the agent fill in the blanks for it, right? Because that's one of the great things about agents is we don't have to be prescriptive like we are with our Cloud Flows. Here, I could just be like, hey, get the recipients. And then maybe if I'm like, all right, if you're having a hard time with that, then we could go down here, start to configure our prompts and stuff. Like we don't want to get that far down the rabbit hole of actions, but I just want to remind you that like, it's not a one-for-one with Flow from the standpoint that this actually has a lot more features and capabilities because we can use the large language model to help determine dynamically or by asking the user for more information what goes in these fields. Right? With Flow, I've always got to put in the information directly. But all of those same fields are here. So the message is down here, so we can start to do that. And then sometimes up here at the top, if you don't see the inputs that you're looking for, if you hit Add, so these are the additional inputs. And so you can see there's an additional one is alert. So since it's not a required input, the agent didn't present it to us, but all of the optional inputs will always be up here under the add. And then you would add is alert. It would show up at the bottom. And then we could configure it with the same type of parameters that we've done in the other ones. Okay. So you are really using your Flow skills. This is Flow, just with a slightly different wrapper around it. So don't overthink this. Don't get overwhelmed by a screen. And I know that you guys are because so many of the people I talk to like get really lost here really fast. You know how to do this, or you know how to go over to Flow, figure it out there, and then bring your logic here. The same thing for outputs. If we go here to outputs, so it's like, all right, my output is a conversation ID, an ID, and a message link. If we switch back to Flow, and then we go here, let's just add an action. Let's add a compose so we can see. There's my compose. So we click in here and click on the dynamic content, message ID, message link, conversation ID. So the same outputs. Now it has an extra one, body. This is really just these three things ungrouped. You would never use body. So that's good, right? These are what we wanted to see here. So the same outputs we see here, we see over there. So after we run that action in our custom agent, we would have availability to use that. All right, I'll switch back over. Even though it's not super obvious, like it doesn't look like Flow here, actions are all about using your skills. And those 1,500 plus connectors that Power Apps and Power Automate have, they're all here. You would just keep going back here to actions, leave. And then you'd add your action. You go up here, you search, you find it, you fill in the blanks, boom, you are taking action. But what if the action isn't enough? You need more. Then let's build an agent flow. So here from the add action screen, right, we've searched here, used our 1,500 plus, but if we do new action here, look, we have new Power Automate Cloud Flow. And so if you choose this, we'll press that, it takes you to a new window where we can build our own Cloud Flow. Now notice it sets up the trigger for you, run a flow from Copilot, and then respond to Copilot is the response. This is exactly the same when you go into Power Apps and you build a flow for your Power App to run. You can trigger it from Power Apps, so you can trigger it from the agent, and then you can have that flow respond back to your Power App, or in this case, our agent. Same exact concepts, same exact actions, just different little wrappers on the names of what they are. Now, once you're over here, you can do anything you know how to do, right? This whole plus, anything you know how to do with flow, you could do here. So for example, say that we wanted to have our agent create and generate a CSV file. Cool. So we'll go here, we'll say plus, and then the first thing I probably want to do is get some data. So how about we use our SharePoint list? So we'll do our SharePoint again. We'll get items, and then from our site address, we could do our Power Apps videos. And then of course, we'll use my world famous employees list right there. Now we're also just going to quickly add on here a filter query because we don't want to get all the employees. We just want to get back the employees for a specific department. So we'll say department EQ. And then inside the single quotes, this is where we would want to pass from our agent the department we want to get the list of employees for. So what we need to do is we go back up here to run a flow from Copilot. We add an input, a text input. We'll give it a name like department, super creative there. And so then now if we go back to our get items, we'll put our cursor between the two single quotes. We'll hit the dynamic content. And then from our run a flow from Copilot, there's department. And remember, in the step-by-step, we built all this. You've done this before. We're just kind of quickly rehashing it again here. So you kind of remember that this is all about your Cloudflow skills. So then that would give us a table of data. When you got a table of data, we can add an action. And how this time we'll use create CSV table, and down here in the data operations, right? We could pull Excel or something. We're trying to make this quick. And so we'll say create our CSV table, and then it's like, all right, well, what table do you want me to use? And so this would be our dynamic content from our get items. So that would be the value, the results. And then here in the dropdown, we'll choose the columns. And then now we can specify, instead of doing automatic columns, we want to do custom. And then we'll throw in just a quick first name, last name, hire date. And then for here, well, for the dynamic, we would then just be able to choose first name, dynamic content again, we'll choose our last name, and then one more time for hire date, we will find our, oh, we gotta hit see more. I'll just search for date because I'm lazy, and there's hire date. Okay, so then that would make that a CSV table. Now that we've got the CSV table, we need to create a file from that, so we'll hit plus. We'll go ahead and create that in SharePoint, so we'll search for SharePoint again, and then we'll say see more, create file, our Power Apps videos again, folder path, we'll go ahead and choose our shared docs, and then for the name of the file, we'll just call it, you know, it'll be fancy. We'll do our little dynamic content here, so department name dot CSV, there you go. And then file content, that would be the dynamic content from the create CSV table. And now we've created the file, we want to be able to send a link for that file back to our agent. So we'll say add one more action, we'll search for SharePoint again, and then create sharing link for a file or folder, and then fill in all these values again like we've done several times before. Now for the item ID, we'll go ahead and from our create file, we had the item ID, so the ID that we just created. And then we'll just make the link type, it's a view only, it's fine. And then we'll just say anyone with a link, including a not, or now we'll just do people in your organization. It doesn't matter, right? We don't really care. But once again, hopefully you're just seeing, like, I'm just building a flow here. And then finally, when we respond to Copilot, we'll add an output, we'll do text, and we'll call this file link. And then here for the value, we'll do the dynamic content. And there is the sharing link we just created. And then here, we'll say something like a sharing link to the CSV file that was just created, right? So nothing new here. This was just a flow. But now that we've got it, we're going to give it a name real quick. How about create and share a CSV? We'll say publish. Okay, now it's saved. We'll switch back over to our agent. Now, when you come back over here and you hit refresh, you might be like, well, wait, where is it? Now, in this case, it showed up for me. Most of the time when I do this demo, it does not show up here. But if it's here, go ahead and click on it. If it doesn't, remember that when you click the ellipses here, you can say flow, and then it will show you all the flows that have a Copilot trigger. And so there it'll typically be in this first left spot. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click on that. So this adds this as an action, the same way that we added that SharePoint as an action earlier. And so we'll just go ahead and say, you know what, leave that name. So we'll say add action. And so now it's in there. And then if we go into our create and share CSV, remember, you'd want to do a good job with your display name description here. We talked about this before. We're not going to do it again, but you'd want to refine this a little bit more than I'm going to here. But if we look at our inputs, we're going to see that department is right here. And it's like, hey, dynamically fill the best option. And in this case, we just wanted to prompt the user. And so we're going to say something like, ask the user for the name of the department that they want to create a CSV for. you'll take their value and pass it as a string. So something like that. And we could get into mechanics there about like how we want to do it. Once again, we're not trying to overthink this. We're really concentrating on the flow side here. And then for the outputs, there comes back our file link. And so maybe we'll just give it a nice name like link to CSV, in the description, the sharing link to the CSV file that was created. So this all seems good to me. So let's go ahead and hit save. And now that it's saved, I'm gonna go ahead and refresh my test section here. And then we'll just try something like create and share a CSV. We'll hit enter. So there in the activity map, we can see that's like, all right, I need to run this. Oh, I need this. I need the information. And they're gonna ask for what department. And so then here we can just type in executive, my favorite one to demo from. We'll say enter. And so then that will pass that information in. Now it's like, hey, wait a minute, I got to connect first, right? So because we've never used this one before, we're going to have to authenticate. So we'll click connect. Here on the list of my managed connections, we'll just go ahead and click manage connections. And remember, you're going to see different things here depending on what you've added before, how you've used it before. So a lot of different things might show up along the way, but basically there will be at least one tied to the flow you just added. And so then we'll say submit. Like you can see here, I have another flow in here, and that one's not forced me because that one's already been connected before. So just manage your connections here. Basically, you want all green check marks before you call yourself done. All right, so I got my green check marks, so I'm gonna switch back over to Studio, and now we'll say retry. And after a moment, you can see the link came back, and so the agent went ahead and said, hey, here's the link. You could click on that, and there you go. Just the CSV file we expected with the 4 executives. Awesome. Now, once again, as you're kind of working through this, so like if I ran this again, for executive, it would actually fail, right? Because that create file can't overwrite an existing file. So, but those are all flow challenges. So just be smart about this. If you start doing multiple iterations of your test and you're like, wait, why did it stop working? The way that you troubleshoot, if you start getting error messages here, like let's call the error message, right? Let's just do it again. So create and share the CSV again. And there you go. You can see that we got this bad gateway error, right? And you're like, where do I go in here to troubleshoot this? You don't. What we would do is we'd switch back over to flow, right? And so then here, if we go to a back, and so here you'd see the run history and you'd see the failure. And if you clicked in there, we see there's a bad request. And if we click into there and go and look, right, a file name with SharePoint, blah, 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 right? Like the response was basically that file name already exists. So anyway, just remember that if you're troubleshooting these, and you're getting these flow errors returned by your agent, then you need to go look at flow, not at your agent, to figure out what is going on. Okay, so that's 2 ways that we use our Power Automate skills. And like I said, hopefully you've got a great idea here. We've done several of these demos along the way. We've ran those generative AI actions in here. There's so much you can do with this, but this is a really powerful way to get the orchestration that maybe you are looking for from your agent, but in an action for your agent. Let's switch back over there and look at the third way. The third way is going to be how we trigger those autonomous agents. Remember, we scrolled down here to the bottom and we had this idea of triggers. So triggers are any of your Power Automate Cloudflow triggers. So you build a Cloudflow that is triggered by whether it's data changing, it's when you get an email, you get a message, could be even manually triggered. It doesn't matter, right? But the trigger is all about building the Cloudflow trigger that you're used to using. And then it is saying, hey, Flow, once you've been triggered, I want you to start an agent. Now to get started, right, the easiest way to do it is go here and say add a trigger. And so then you can look at kind of the different featured ones. These are the most common scenarios, so great ones to choose to begin with. But of course, any flow could do what we're going to do, right? So let's go ahead and try this. We haven't done Microsoft Forms. Like I've never used it. So it's what better time than now in front of you, right? So let's click on that. And so when you click in, right, it starts to lay this thing out. It's like, all right, the trigger name when a new response is submitted, okay. And then it did the connections. So we'll say next. And then now it's, once again, using my flow skills. It's like, hey, I need to know the form ID. And so then there's all the different forms that I do. So just grab like my Copilot Jumpstart class feedback. And so then it's like, hey, all right. So when that form, new item gets added, I'm going to trigger this thing and I'm just going to send everything that I got back from that over to my agent. So if we say create trigger, all right, after a few seconds, it's like, hey, you should go test this thing. So if we say close, so now our trigger is here. Now keep in mind that when you're creating these triggers, that an agent can be triggered by multiple flows. So it doesn't have to just be one, right? That's a little bit different. But if we want to kind of go see it, we can just click the ellipses here. And then we'll say edit and Power Automate. Once again, this is just a Cloudflow. You've built hundreds of these or thousands of these if you're me, but there it is. So when a new response is submitted, like it filled in the blanks for us, then send a prompt to our quick demos agent. and just send over the dynamic content of use content from. Now in the step-by-step, we talked about how you can craft that. You can be more specific, right? Anything that you know how to do, you can do here. And it doesn't have to be this simple. You could have 25 other steps in here. So when it's got submitted, you're going to do a whole bunch of stuff, get a whole bunch of content approvals, put it in the database, all those things, then trigger your agent. It doesn't matter. Whatever you know how to do, all our agent cares about is at some point you prompt it and you send it some data so it can take action. And remember, these triggers, you could build any trigger you want. If you didn't like this trigger, delete it, change it to a different trigger. Maybe you want to have your Power App trigger the agent. Great. The biggest key here is that this send to prompt is what we're after. And so, if we hit the little plus, just so you know, like you could go add to an existing one. So you would just go here and say Copilot Studio. And then when we've talked about respond to Copilot, that was a few minutes ago, but we kind of keep scrolling down here, there is execute Copilot. And so that's the same action. So you could just add that to any flow you want. You choose your agent from all those agents. You can see I've built a lot recently. And then like once we choose one of these, I don't choose BuddyBot. And then here in the drop down, we've got, all the different things that we're wanting to send. And so we're most likely going to say, hey, here's the body message. And then this is where you fill in your dynamic content of what you want the agent to execute for you. So triggers, they're just flows that execute copilots. All right, so then back over here, actually, let's switch to the agent we built in the step-by-steps. We'll click on agents. And then there is my incident report triage custom agent. Remember, this was the autonomous agent that in the previous section I taught you how to build step-by-step. And so just a reminder as well here, right? It had our trigger. And then with your triggers, so there's our edit like we talked about before, but we also then can do the test. And so then this is where we say, hey, take this information that you previously ran and redo it. So that way I didn't have to keep creating incident reports over and over again. So you can continuously feed in your triggers as well. Cancel back out of that. All right, so then obviously this is where you delete the triggers because triggers don't have an option up here. So this is the only place you manage them. But you can also, we could add triggers. So we could have this agent started by a couple of different ways and it'd be no problem to us. As long as we pass the right information, it doesn't care. Okay, back over to our demo agent. Last but not least, let's look at agent flows. So over on the left, you see flows. And so what this is the ability to build fast, predictable automations, right? I'm reading off the screen. Now the idea here, right, so when we built our autonomous agent, we gave it actions and we gave it instructions and knowledge and all this information. But at the end of the day, it was up to the large language model of our autonomous agent to make decisions on when to do what and how to facilitate the outcomes that we told it to do. So that's very flexible. It's very non-deterministic, right? Like we're just saying, hey, here's what you have going in. Here's what I want you to do coming out. But how you do it in the middle, it's up to you. But sometimes you have processes where you're like, no, I want a rigid, firm, do it this step, this step, this step, this step, right? So very similar to the automations that we build over in Cloudflow sometimes. But sometimes we want an agent or AI into that mix as well. So the idea here with an agent flow is that we're going to build a type of agent that runs in that deterministic, straightforward, boom, 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 boom model and isn't as free thinking as the autonomous agent was that we built previously. Now there's two different ways to do it. You can either do a new agent flow here. And so then this is going to allow you to use your words. So you're going to use a Copilot here, provided information, and then it's going to help us build different ones. So for example, email message every time an item on SharePoint is updated. So that's not super agent-y sounding right now, but that's all right. We can use that as the framework to get started to make it work better for us. So if we just click that, that'll put that into the box up here and pass in the prompt. So it's like, hey, here's what I would do if that's what you wanted me to build. Now we could either accept this, keep and continue, or we can continue to add more details until we get it to be shaped the way we want. But maybe we're like, you know what? I think I can work from that structure. So we're just going to say keep it and continue. Then it's going to do its authentication checks like we've been seeing over and over again. And so here we're like, all right, cool. We're going to say create. And so now it just drops us into a Cloudflow interface, but it is still inside of Copilot Studio. Everything we've done up until now has launched us into a separate tab all the way over to Power Automate. This is all going to be built within the confines of Copilot Studio, right? A nice little bundle for us here. But you can see not only did it build it, but it also configured things. So like if we click in here, it's like, all right, I did everything I could, but now you need to tell me what is the site address. So we'll just use my Power Apps videos, and then the list name, we'll use employees again, just to make it easy on us, okay? So when an item gets added there, then it's going to get my profile, and then it's going to send an email. And notice like it's already figured out that, okay, so from getting his profile, I know the mail, and SharePoint item updated was the subject and the body, but we could of course modify this any way we want. Now in reality, we would probably want to add more to this, right? Like the most common thing you're probably going to end up doing, I'm going to click add an action here, is we want to add one of our AI capabilities. Like you can see, they put these front and center because like this is what you probably want to do. And so for us, we want to create a text with GPT. Like let's just say see all real quick. So once again, these are the different AI builder things just being pushed front and center. And so if we say create text with GPT using a prompt, then we'll get that same interface. Here's all the list of common prompts, or we could just say, here's a new custom prompt, give it a quick name, summarize the new employee. And then if we go here into instructions, we could just do something. We'll just do a quick prompt, like look at the new employee that was added here. We'll say add, and then we're going to pass in the text. And we'll just do a text input, sure, say close. And then we'll just go down here and say something like, provide a brief summary of them based on their title, department, and favorite color. Now notice here we can change our prompt. And so we could use that deep reasoning that Jack talked to us about previously, or we just stick with the basic one here for now. But then now we need to click back on text input. And so then this would be where we put in our sample data of department, title, favorite color. So close. And then of course, now if we say test our prompt. So it doesn't matter, right? We've talked about this before, like building these is something for later. But anyway, now that we saved that, now it's like, hey, for my text input, what goes here? Our little dynamic content. And then we would write out our department equals, and then dynamic content, and then see more. And there's a department, and then we can just hit enter, and then title equals, and then same thing, dynamic content, title, and then enter, and then favorite color, dynamic content, and then favorite color value. So then that would pass that information to the prompt. And now that it's there, then we could go down here, send an email, and then instead of an item was updated, right? Well, we could say something like a new employee was added, their name is, and then dynamic content. And so then from when they got added, was their first name. And then down here, we would just include our summary. And so then that could be our text from our create GPT. And so there you go. Now we've built a flow. Now we built an agent flow that's just automatically going to trigger every time someone new gets added. We're going to process it through a prompt, grab the information, and then send off an email. Now, hopefully you're getting the idea of what is possible. You could build very large, very complex things, multiple moving pieces. Maybe you've got approvals in there. Maybe in the case of this new employee, it's sending these actions off to different people to make sure that their accounts are getting created, their computer's getting ordered, all of that stuff you want facilitated. But the idea here is that when a new person gets hired, we have a very structured process, so it's going to follow that. And we're just incorporating AI into the mix as we see fit. Now, one difference to note here is that these typically are, all right, well, when I do this, this is going to use one of my AI builder credits. When you build this as an agent flow, that is not correct. When you build this as an agent flow, then because this is tied to Copilot Studio, everything that happens in here is using your Copilot Studio messages, not AI builder credits. So that's kind of changing the model a little bit as you start approaching it. So depending on your business scenario, maybe that's an easier licensing scenario for you than getting AI builder credits. So this is using your Copilot Studio messages. So we don't want to get into licensing too much, but I wanted you to understand that that is a key determination there. Also, as we move down the road, they're going to continue to add more special capabilities inside of these agent flows. So there's some new approval types, there's some new logic processing things that are all coming. But this is kind of setting that foundation for you. So once again, you're using your flow skills and you're building something very similar to a flow, but you're building it within the confines of Copilot Studio. So it's an agent flow. And so you're going to get some different advantages from that shortly. Do you get it now? Flow is everywhere in the process of building custom agents. And that is a great thing for all of us. All of our previous skills just shining through to make us the stars that we are. The only question left is what type of awesome custom agents are you going to build now that you know you have the right tools already? Okay, thanks for learning with me. I'll see you over in the next video in just a second.